Hello. So this is the second part of me, the truth about coronavirus. So I'm bringing in two articles. One is Professor Yoram Lass, who I should actually translate his his interview. It appears on YouTube in Hebrew. But meanwhile, I think there is another no less important voice from a woman professor. So he says it is a plague with public relations, and many more people will die of depression. So he says that a few days ago, he heard the people in the health ministry warn against interviewing him. And he said that instead of that, they wanted to interview somebody who said there will be 40 million in the best scenario, there will be 40 million people dead and maybe even 300 million. And just for to get proportions, he said if I had been if the interview had been canceled, he would have explained that in Italy, in flu season, every year die 7,000 Italians, and in Israel, um, from the flu last year, only 126 people died. Italy is known for having a lot of respiratory system diseases, three times more than other European countries. In the US, from a regular flu, 40,000 people died. That's what President Trump started to say, and then afterwards they started to accuse him of trying to minimize the problem. And the corona, till now, 40 to 50 people died in the US. He says, I don't know, it always changes, mostly in nursing homes. Um, he says that in Italy, the the average age of those who died from corona is more than 81 years old. It's a very elderly, very fragile population, smokes a lot, and there are many more men. In Korea, more women not smoking. So every country, you have to compare those that are dying of corona now to the number that died from a regular seasonal flu. And people are not interested in that. Every country you can take statistics from has more people, many more people dying of a regular flu than corona. And he said he at first they listened to him, but now people are not listening to him anymore. And then he mentions the flu. The pig flu, it's called here, 2009. It came from Mexico, but then there was no Facebook. Um, when they had the pig vaccination, there was also no vaccination at the beginning. Um, Corona is uh, it's a plague with public relations. That's what he calls it. Um, the number of those dying from the virus are not so scary. And he says that in China, um, from 70 million people in this Khovoy district, 70 million people, 3,000 people died. Every country you look at, the numbers are relatively low. So it's not like the Black Plague in the Middle Ages in Italy, where a third of the Italians died. According to, if it was like the Black Plague, there should have 20 million people should have died. Smallpox that the Europeans brought to America finished 90% of the Indians. The atmosphere in the country is now of a disease that will destroy the whole population. And if they prophesize that 300 million people, if the prognosis is 300 million people will die worldwide, that means that in Israel there will die a million. But still, the numbers are not, they do not justify the fear. And in China, they already been able to stop the virus. And there's also a natural immunity that they forget to talk about. That's how he says the government doesn't cure plagues. What really happens is that the virus, this is a professor of medicine, nobody can stop. Once the population is exposed to the virus, people develop antibodies. And also in Israel, a lot of people have this virus without even knowing. And they are exposed to it and they get immune. He says he agrees with the British system that the elderly people should be isolation and the people that are vulnerable. Now we have know that the Prime Minister of England has contracted this virus, but you know, even Boris Johnson changed his mind. By the way, he has now corona. So he was speaking before Boris Johnson had corona. He says Boris Johnson broke. The problem is that psychology defeats science. Science relies on on facts, on collecting data, and he said that according to the data that he provides, it's not so bad. Regular flu is doesn't we don't even look at regular flu, but in this monstrous hysteria, fascist regimes, um, it's the same kind of hysteria that fascist regimes use to control people. And people are undergoing some kind of a psychological process. So he says, when we drive cars, we cause the deaths of 350 people a year. If we stop all the public transportation in Israel, we'll save their lives. We will save them. Another example, a lot of soldiers that are young kill because we have political agendas that are sometimes not realistic. So because of this risk, we have to take apart the army to save their lives. So what's happening, he says, it's the same price we're paying for the regular flu. In Israel, 126 people die. In US, 40,000. In Italy, 17,000. And this is the price we pay for living a normal life. We don't shut down the whole country. And he says he calls it the day of atonement, the economical and social day of atonement. Hundreds of thousands of Israelis lost their jobs, and they will die from heart attacks, from anxiety, or from depression. So we're taking chances and we're paying a price. And he says also, Prime Minister of Hungary played with this because he uses it against foreigners, because he said that the plague started from two Iranian students. He says, so he's asked by Donald Trump changed his mind. So how do you explain that? He says, Professor Lass says, I'm a man of science. Feelings, emotions don't change my mind, don't influence me. I will not think in opposition to facts. And most of the people agree that psychology, if not hysteria, are stronger than facts, than common sense. So they're asking what happens if you're wrong. You don't know how many people are going to die. He says every year in Italy, 17,000 people die, and people don't even address that. I will continue and say that 17,000 and more will die of corona. If 170,000 will die, I will say I was wrong. But so far, there have been 2,200 dead people. 2,200 people in Italy died. In Germany, a few. From 80 million Germans, a small proportion of people died from 80, if you think about 80 million Germans. And the plague is already 2 months in the world. And Germany didn't do anything. There was nothing special until hysteria drove affected everything. So he's asking, there's no brave leader that says, I'm going to do something different? And he said, no. And there are actually some leaders that use it for their benefits, like Prime Minister of Hungary and his racist remarks. And we know who's going to use um, the hysteria. Also, Prime Minister Netanyahu was supposed to leave, and now he's still in government. This is like Orwell, George Orwell. It's called Orwellian process. One nation, one flag, one fear. Everybody's hysterical and waving the flag of Italy. They're not willing to talk about the numbers. And this swine, sorry, it's not pig, swine flu was stopped without stopping the world. Every virus causes the immune system of regular people, the average person, to produce antibodies. A government cannot stop the plague. What stops the plague is natural immunity, the work of the immune system. You cannot stop you cannot stop it with the government. The Chinese said they stopped it because there was a quarantine, but now the quarantine is over and the virus is still free, and people are not, there's no more, you don't see a rise in death and sickness. So if the theory of quarantine was right, they would still continue, the number of dead in China would continue to rise. The government says I did it, but they forget that the body is very clever. The body of an average person produces a natural immunity. And then this this cycle of people getting, uh, getting the virus from other people is finished. Otherwise, it would continue. All right. So, if we look at the number of dead from people that died from the flu in Italy, 17,000, it's clear that it's only the edge of the iceberg of whoever was sick in this disease. There were hundreds of thousands, maybe millions that were sick but didn't die. Also, the people that are sick that didn't die needed treatment, and the health system didn't collapse. So why should it collapse now? So the health ministry of Israel reacted and say Professor Laz, during his time, there was a very bad polio incident. Um, he can cause a lot of damage because he's irresponsible statements. I don't know. I think we should listen to it and think carefully. So now there's Professor Ochama Weiss, who's a professor of Talmud, the Jewish interpretation to the Bible, and she says this is very important tradition, Jewish tradition, is this dialogue, this people discussing different opinions, and it's very important to keep dialogues and um, keep talking about ideas. So at least that's what I understand from reading it. So she says, in the time of Corona, she thinks that Professor Ruchama Weiss says, I do, she doesn't dispute the need to do something about it, but she says that Corona is not the only risk. Also, staying at home for those who are suffering from domestic violence is dangerous. Also, depression is a disease that can kill, and also anxiety from losing your job. So you cannot treat corona as if that's the only problem. We all know from the statistics of corona, they're not going to count how many people were murdered by their husbands, how many children underwent domestic terror, and all the people that anxiety and depression increased. Because of that, we don't listen, we don't hear how easy it is to just talk about corona and how untrue that is. While we go to extreme isolation, corona is functioning in a complex life circumstances, and we have to think about all the price we're paying. The people, uh, the all those who deal with domestic violence say that it's a third more women contact them complaining. Think about the ones who don't contact them complaining about domestic violence. And children who grew up with such homes, violent homes, are also in danger. So we have to also think about domestic violence and confronting depression and anxiety. And we have to listen to the fact that women that suffer from violence um, are now locked away with people that endanger their life. Women are living with people who endanger their lives. Um, so we have to explain how to deal with domestic violence, and we have to explain about not only elderly parents but also talk about depression. It's a disease that is dangerous, life-threatening disease. Depression is a life-threatening disease, and we have to think of creative solutions to that. We have to think about how to combat depression from we don't want the elderly are safe from corona, but the other the younger generation will be suffering from depression. Men and women are dealing with fear of economy. Businesses shut down, will never, some of them will never open again. So we have to deal with a lot of problems. A lot of people are scared. You can't just deal with corona uh, and not deal with the psychological problems. And maybe if you know people that are in distress, please pick up the phone and call them and listen to their silent calls for help. And it's very important to contact people that you might be in danger. So it's very important to talk about these things. I think my intuitive feeling was to be very angry when I listened to certain religious leaders saying how wonderful Corona is because it will strengthen spirituality. People will stop because they don't have entertainment. They won't. They will be going to higher places and they will be more connected to God and be more spiritual. I think this kind of view is dangerous because it doesn't deal with the complexity of this situation. People having to live in isolation don't necessarily contact God. People that have a tendency to be anxious will suffer. People that have a tendency to be depressed will suffer greatly, and they will not be receiving the help. Luckily, there are helplines still available, by the way. If you know the local helplines for, don't hesitate and talk. Very important to express your feelings and not to listen to all those voices that say, oh, this is really a blessing in disguise. It's not a blessing in disguise. And it's important to listen to voices like Professor Yoram Lass that say that this is a fabrication of social media and that coronavirus is not more dangerous than the flu virus. Today I was walking down the street with my two dogs and I was talking to the phone because this is the way I cope. And a man was walking towards me, a young man, I must say, and he had a mask on his face with smiley. This was very grotesque. And then he screamed at me, "Move, move!" And I ignored him because he could also move. And he walked past me. I guess I'm lucky that this coronavirus, because he looked like he was going to hit me. And then as soon as he passed me 2 meters, he screamed at me, "You fucking idiot!" And I was really shocked by the violence of his reaction. But then I realized that this is fear. This person is completely, he had gloves on, he had a face mask on. Both of them, I'm not sure how effective they are. What I heard that washing your hands is the most effective way. And the mask, most masks will not protect you from a virus. They're not built to protect from this virus. They only are protecting other people if you have a cold. So this hysteria, this mass hysteria, I think this is just the beginning. I think a lot of people that have a tendency to get angry and violent will get more angry and violent, and people that are scared will get more scared. People that are depressed, that have a tendency for depression, will get more depressed. So I'm saying this not to scare people, but just to make people aware. And if you know somebody who's in trouble, please reach out to them. And don't walk past your neighbor like my neighbors do and ignore them. Not all my neighbors. No, no, no. I have to mention nice neighbors that don't do that. But, most of the time people here ignore. Then this is a big city, and the people are not very interested in neighbors. They're young people. They work a lot of hours in mostly computer industry. They're not interested to say hello to a neighbor. They haven't been raised to be nice. This is not polite culture. However, if you see a neighbor, just wave from 2 meters away. That's social isolation. Doesn't mean ignoring. It doesn't mean putting up a fence, a tile fence. It can be, it's possible to still smile from 2 meters, as I do, to talk to people from, you walk your dogs, one is 2 meters away, you can still hold a conversation, you can speak loudly. If there are not a lot of people in the street, say, hello, how are you feeling? This can make such a difference in people's life. When you're feeling sad, depressed, anxious, a smile, a wave of the hand, can make such a difference. So be friendly. And I wish with all these campaigns to stay inside, stay safe, don't go outside, there'll be also a campaign, smile. You can see 2 meters away. We're visual creatures. You can see 2 meters away a smile. You can feel good energies. Smile and wave to your neighbor from far away. On the balcony, you see somebody? Wave to them. And as for home, I'm I'm having troubles dealing with things also. Try to realize that this is a stressful time and try to speak to each other, to work on your communication. And this is an opportunity to speak about everything that bothers you. But remember, do it in small, don't try to open up huge conversations all at once, but try to speak 5 minutes at a time. Find the right time, not when somebody's watching a movie or reading a book or listening to music. Just maybe over a meal, or just ask them how they're doing, how they're feeling, check up with each other. This is a good time for social awareness. Social isolation does not mean to delete people from your life completely. It's a good time to check also who in your life is a support system and who's going to be the opposite, who's going to make you more anxious, who's going to make you feel more unloved, unwanted, and not worthy of their time. If people treat you as if you don't matter, you should reciprocate, close the door, and say politely, thank you, no thank you. Turn your back and look forward to new relationships, new contacts. I must admit, I have now 4 telephone numbers of people I met at the dog beach, and I am definitely looking forward. I don't know if maybe none of them will end up as friends, but at least one or two of these contacts seem to be people that I would like to be friends with in the future. So you never know. You might meet a new best friend standing in line 2 meters away in the supermarket. And these are times where maybe on the social media, you find someone who has a lot of things in common with you. So this is not time to necessarily close down, and enjoy the silence, but don't live with silence to your feelings. You understand what I mean? The difference? Enjoy listening to birds sing, and it's so quiet now. And enjoy that silence. But if you're not used to it, it might make you anxious. So try to find ways to alleviate your anxiety. Think about what makes you feel good and be open to listen to voices that are critical. of those who would like us to be living lives led by fear. Remember, a life led by fear is a life that will not be a happy life. If we're not motivated by love, by peace, by seeking uh, to better ourselves, and to improve our life quality by whatever makes us happy, uh, we will not end up in good places. So, whatever makes you happy, reading a book, singing a song, listening to a good program, and minimize the news. You don't need to know that much. You don't need to know how many people died. And most important, remember to be critical thinker. If I don't have tattoos, but if I could have a tattoo on my arm, here, I would have, what I would have written? Be a critical thinker. Always with, what is the term? With a grain of salt, is it? Yes. So do not believe everything you hear. Be critical. Realize that even the greatest experts might be motivated and pulled by political agendas. So be very, very skeptical about everything you hear. And, like in yoga, we do one position, then we do the opposite to balance. Let's say we bend our head backwards, then we bend it forward. Same thing with opinions. Always try to read the opposite opinion. That's what I try to do. If I read something extreme left, then I read something extreme right, or not right. Try to find the middle way by listening to both arguments, if that's what you want. If you don't want to listen to arguments about Corona, don't listen. Just do whatever makes you happy, and whatever gets you through the night. It's all right. Peace, light, and love.